In this section, we'll look at some of the major events of John F. Kennedy's record on civil rights up to 1963. Assuming the presidency in 1963 was the Massachusetts Senator John F. Kennedy, who, like Truman, was a Democrat, and like Truman, he wasn't against black civil rights, but he, again, worried about alienating Southern conservatives with his own party. If he pushed too hard, it might hurt his support he needed for his other economic and foreign policy objectives. Kennedy, however, appointed his younger brother Robert Kennedy Attorney General. Now, the younger Kennedy was more ideologically committed to black civil rights and urged JFK to move more forcefully. The administration Robert Kennedy lobbied did not want to be on the wrong side of history. The first test for JFK began only weeks after his inauguration in 1961. A group of northern white liberals and young black activists, including Schnick, planned to press the matter of segregation in interstate busing. Because busing companies crossed state lines, the federal government had the jurisdiction, and they called their effort the Freedom Riders, and they planned to sit interracially on the buses as they drove through the South. And when they would stop at bus stops, the whites would use the black bathrooms and waiting areas, while the blacks would use the white waiting rooms and bathrooms. It was a gutsy protest likely to engender violence. The Freedom Riders anticipated that if their nonviolent protest met with violence, it'd be broadcast nationally and to discredit the segregationists. It would therefore force Kennedy to act with new civil rights legislation. Beginning in Washington in the spring of 1961, the Freedom Riders ventured south, winning considerable press and a lot of abuse from locals wherever they stopped. Robert Kennedy dispatched FBI agents to follow the buses and report what took place, just to keep him informed. The Kennedy administration, however, did not offer proactively federal protection for fear of alienating the Southern whites, provoking the very violence that they hoped to avoid. The Freedom Riders went relatively without major incidents until it reached Anniston in northern Alabama. In Anniston, one group of riders was attacked and beaten. A second Freedom bus was halted, bombed, set afire, and destroyed by a mob. The FBI agents called Washington frantically and reported that local police were doing nothing. When the riders tried to proceed from Anniston to Montgomery, the situation deteriorated still further. The governor of Alabama denounced them as rabble-rousers and made no attempt to curb resentful white citizens. Thus encouraged, they mobbed the riders so ferociously that the Washington government, in the absence of effective action by state or local authorities, just had to intervene. Only after Robert Kennedy sent several hundred federal marshals to Montgomery to prevent further violence did the governor finally act. He proclaimed martial law and employed state, National Guardsmen, and police to restore order. The Freedom Rides still continued. Bruised but unintimidated, most of the original groups left Montgomery for Jackson, Mississippi, in a bus now under heavy police escort. Many of them were arrested in Jackson for violating a segregation ordinance, but officials were scrupulously careful to prevent further acts of violence. Thereafter, in fact, the riders met with little worse than epithets, angry stares, and occasional mass arrests. State authorities, aware of the unfavorable publicity the Anniston and Montgomery had received in the North and abroad, took steps to avert similar outbreaks. Results came finally later in 1961 when the Interstate Commerce Commission ordered all bus companies to desegregate interstate routes, post signs that effect on every bus, and cease stopping at restaurants and terminals that maintained segregated facilities. The bus lines complied, and an increasing number of local terminals took down their white and colored signs and grudgingly admitted blacks who sought to enter the white section. Although the Freedom Riders resulted in partial rather than total victory, they marked a significant erosion in the strength of Jim Crow segregation. As the Freedom Riders wound down in late 1961, a new movement grew in Albany, Georgia. Coordinated again through Schnick, protesters first began to get arrested at the bus station, which was still segregated. In a new tactic, the Schnick protesters would refuse to be bailed out of jail. In time, the movement grew, undoubtedly hoping that the police would respond in a violent way, thus winning converts to the movement, or by simply flooding the jail, another spectacle sure to gain publicity. The Albany police chief, however, was smart, and he ordered his officers to avoid all violence. He also arranged with other counties and towns to have those arrested protesters bused to their jails. What resulted was no spectacle for the media, but an orderly process that really put little pressure on city leaders. The movement, now apparently against all forms of segregation in Albany, but undoubtedly stalled, invited Martin Luther King to participate, hoping to win coverage through him. SNCC had first tried to avoid King because they thought he had not adequately supported the Freedom Riders. King, however, agreed and was arrested. When, by the fall of 1962, however, the media had largely faded and the city still had not desegregated, King agreed to be bailed out. The Albany movement, therefore, was one of the notable failures of the African American civil rights movement. Presidential action did kind of grow progressively stronger in response to events in the Deep South as Kennedy's administration went on. There was, for example, the case of James H. Meredith, a black Mississippian who had instituted a suit charging racial bias after the University of Mississippi had rejected his 2 applications to enroll. Now, a variety of legal means to secure his admission all failed in the face of Governor Ross Barnett's defiance of judicial authority. Finally, after Meredith had tried 4 times to register but was rebuffed by a couple hundred state police in September 1962, the U.S. Circuit Court in New Orleans announced that its powers were exhausted and further action would have to be up to the executive branch. President Kennedy, therefore, moved decisively to ensure compliance with the court's orders. On September 30, he ordered several hundred federal marshals to accompany Meredith into the university campus at Oxford, Mississippi. Kennedy also sent federal troops to a base at nearby Memphis, Tennessee, and even federalized the National Guard. That evening, a mob of students and bystanders attacked the marshals with rocks and occasional rifle fire, and a fierce battle ensued all the way through the night until the dawn the following morning. The state police withdrew, and only with the prompt arrival of federal troops did they really sought to restore order. 2 civilians were killed and 70 wounded before order was restored. State resistance melted away as federal bayonets kept order from that point on out. Meredith was finally registered on October 1st and began attending classes, always under heavy guard. This unrest became known as the Battle of Oxford, Mississippi. This concludes a section on JFK, some of the major civil rights events up to 1963.